And I think that with the policies that the Tory party, the Conservative Party, have announced with the general election, they want to build 1.6 million more homes in the next parliamentary era.
Where's that number come from? We would call that a PFA number. If you're being polite, you're plucked from air. If you're being less polite, you can probably work it out.
Welcome to This Property Life, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the world of property. I'm Sarah Blaney and I'm here with my co-host Nick Claydon, and together we'll present real life stories from the heart of the property industry. Every week we chat with a diverse range of people, from experts to newcomers, who each share their unique experiences, hurdles and victories in the property market. Today, though, we are just chatting with each other about the upcoming general election, and we thought it would be interesting just to have a little look through some of the policies that each of the main parties are proposing for housing, how that will affect the market and how it will affect us as property investors. So hello to you, Nick.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you very much.
Good. How's the sunny south coast?
Well, I tell you what, summer's just suddenly arrived, hasn't it? And I know that we have to always start these podcasts on an analysis of the weather. I think it's just part of our inherent Britishness, but it's been cracking down here.
Excellent.
And the Scotland market.
I wish I could say the same. We have odd days, which we're very grateful for. But
yeah. No, I was on the beach yesterday after the school run, and very beautiful, very nice. Sorry about that.
I'm delighted for you.
Yeah, I bet you are. I bet. Anyway, from the beach to the housing policies of the major political parties of the UK, such a gripping and
it kind of comes down to like who should landlords vote for? To put all other policies aside, if it just came down to housing policy and things that will affect property investors, maybe let's go with that angle. Who should a property investor really vote for if you take everything, all other kind of political ideology aside? Off the table?
All the ideology's gone and it's literally just about housing. So I guess we should have a tiny little wrap up of what the main parties are kind of saying. And let's start with the incumbents. So the Conservative Party, and actually, do you know what? The Conservative Party and the Labour Party, they're not too dissimilar on this, I don't think, but let's just do a wrap up. So do you want to take the Tories and I'll summarise the Labour?
Right, okay. I could go on for a long time about the Tories, and I'm just only talking about housing here. There's no,
absolutely.
It's just purely on housing. The Tories have basically tried to eradicate private landlords from the sector over the last several years. Section 24, stamp duty. What else have they done, Sarah? Lots. Section 20,
and
big one.
Not so much the renters aspect, but the upcoming holiday let changes that we've also had. Obviously, Liz Truss tried to destroy us in one fell swoop with the mini budget and the effect on interest rates.
Like this. Awesome. So it's been a bit of a catalogue of disaster from the Tories as it affects investors. And but when we talk about housing, we're going to be covering everything from investors, buy-to-let investors, HMO investors, up to kind of developers as well. Different policies will affect different types of investor or developer in different ways. But looking at it purely from a property investor mindset, the Tories have been like anti-landlord for a long time, and we kind of became the whipping boys, I guess, after bankers. It was like after the whole 2008-9 crisis, bankers were, that everyone hated on bankers for a long time, and then it was like, right, who can we hate now? Okay, landlords, let's go for them.
Yeah, easy target.
Yeah, easy target. Been pretty brutal, and everyone has this kind of. Well, I'll say everyone. Okay, I think there's a lot of people out there who have this impression of landlords as being the kind of slum landlord walking around in their top hats, and housing people in poverty, in horrendous conditions. I think that has been historically like a view of landlords. The reality is very, very different. As professional and ethical landlords, we abhor that kind of business as much as anybody. We're all about providing quality rental houses to a sector that really needs it. And I don't think any government properly understands the housing market.
I definitely don't, because each time a policy is announced or even half announced, the manipulation in the market has some pretty far-reaching consequences that never, ever benefits the tenants.
The law of unintended consequences. They just don't really. I've never really understood the effects of policies that they bring in, blanket policies, and this affects local. Yes, I could talk about this for a long time. Local government as well, bringing in Article 4, as designations for HMOs. It's like sledgehammers to crack a nut. There's a problem with poor quality HMOs, but this whole policy comes in, has all these unintended consequences, and I've seen it in various markets I operate in. Where can we go with it? Section 24 was a big, a big driver. A lot of landlords, I think, exiting the market.
Mm-hmm.
It affected a lot of people who probably didn't buy the way that we teach people to buy, I would say. So it did affect a lot of the more amateur landlords, the people that maybe held on to properties that they once owned, and have acquired properties that, the accidental landlords.
Yeah, which, the majority of the volume of landlords are people that own like one property.
Yeah, I think it was it.
It's high.
I think it's a high number.
It's very high. It's something like 80 to 90%, I think.
Yeah,
it's a ridiculous number.
So I kind of get why they're doing that, but what they fail to really understand, the Conservative government have not really understood this, is that there is a massive need for rental property, good quality rental property, and well-educated, trained property investors provide that, because local councils are not providing that.
So historically, we have had policies brought in that have reduced the private rental sector. It has either pushed people completely out of the market, or it's pushed them to put in the properties towards a different use, which could be the short stay accommodation market. That's not proven, but there's a big assumption that that's happening. And there's definitely been an increase in that market, but I don't think the numbers don't add slightly there. But equally, people are moving into the social housing, supported living, or I think people are just exiting the market because it's been made so difficult. And I think that with the policies that the Tory party, the Conservative Party, have announced with the general election, they want to build 1.6 million more homes in the next parliamentary era.
Where's that number come from? We would call that a PFA number. If you're being polite, you're from air. If you're being less polite, you can probably work it out. But where's that number come from? It's just like it's like Labour, I think, said we'll do 1.5. So instead of we'll do 1.6.
Yes. And if we look at the facts of, I think it's something like 2.4 million in the last 14 years. And so they want to basically ramp that up and squeeze 60 whatever % of that in the next 4 years.
But it's like when you drill down into how are you actually going to implement that? It's just how? You're just plucking a number out of the air, and everyone, expecting people to go, oh, cool, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. But how are you going to deliver that?
Yeah, it is completely undeliverable for a number of reasons, and there's lots of them that are there, including the cost of labour, the cost of materials, planning, Section 106, all of these big things that come into play that have just made the construction industry unviable, really. The insolvencies within that industry is up and continues to climb. I think I read the other week, and we were chatting about it earlier in the week, that one of the big housing builders within the southern market, especially in London, which is Berkeley Group, are turning some of their sites into build to rent, and then using traditional lending to maximize the returns on those sites. So instead of building and selling, they are building to rent, which is effectively what we do as sort of smaller landlords, is that model. And the big housing construction companies are now taking that on. And there's a reason. It's because it's unprofitable to build houses.
So again, unintended consequences, but
yes.
The market reacts, and this is what we have to do, is react and work out what is the best way forward for the smaller investor, the private investor. When Section 424 came in, obviously going forward, we all moved to buying within limited companies. But we still got a historical problem with properties. Anyone that's built up a property portfolio over the years is still in personal names, and we were very much in that position. It causes a massive tax burden, and probably 90% of our tenant base is probably classified under social housing, because that's where the market, or rather the revenue works. That's where the model works for what we teach. And again, so we got massively affected by that, and we're actually providing what the government needs, which is housing for people who can't afford to buy their own homes. And this is where I think that a lot of the government goes wrong. They think everyone wants to buy their own home, everyone should be able to buy their own home. But the reality is, there's a huge number of the population that can't or don't want to own their own home. One of the conservative policies has been tax breaks, capital gains tax breaks if you sell properties to your tenants. Okay, on paper, brilliant, what a great idea. But reality is, for a lot of investors, if I look at my buy-to-let portfolio, or let's say my HMO portfolio, well, who's buying that? I can't sell my HMO, my 6-bed HMO properties to the students. Well, they're not buying that. What's the point? And on my buy-to-let portfolio, because of what it is, and the typical tenant that lives with them, a lot of my properties are rented by single mums that are just not in a position to be getting mortgages and buying property. They're quite happy renting. They like renting. I think if I offered my entire buy-to-let portfolio to the incumbent tenants, it's not really buyers.
I wouldn't know what to do. I think there is it is, as you say, it's complete lack of understanding of the market, and it's broad brush comments that they think will appeal to the voters, rather than actual reality. And the reality is that we are an island that has a growing population and a decreasing housing stock compared to, and it's a pure supply and demand, and we haven't built enough homes, and that's where it should lie. But having a broad brush of we're going to build 1.6 million, or for Labour, we're going to build 1.5 million, are literally just words. They're just sentences that are backed up by nothing.
Yeah, and saying like, oh, are we going to reform planning? Okay, how are you doing that?
Yeah, and we've had planning changes over the last few years. We've had permitted development, we've had Class E. I know you're different up in Scotland, but in England we have had those planning changes, and it's still difficult.
We've had it as well. So the use class system has changed land use in Scotland as well. But I mean, I'm stuck in a planning battle for something that is a really simple planning application, really simple. Policies there, everything's in place. It should be a very, very simple decision, and we're now 8 months in.
Yeah,
and fighting a battle that even the local residents are all supporting what we're trying to do with the building in Edinburgh, and the council are almost purposefully being obstructive. So What is
The
that?
dynamic we have where I live is that it is it's the housing prices are high down here. I'm on the coast, so there's only a certain amount of land because otherwise we go into the sea. And any available piece of real estate of any size that comes up is immediately snapped up by retirement homes, of which we have a plethora. And they are being pushed through despite being planning being rejected at local level, at county level. It then goes to a general appeal and the big guys get their planning through. And all of the retirement homes that we have down here in my town where I live opposite the Isle of Wight, they're all 35% occupied. So we are adding hundreds of retirement properties in to a market that has only got 35% occupancy instead of building homes.
Yeah. And why is that? It's very, I don't know, but I would probably guess that it's more profitable to build retirement homes and there may be tax breaks for doing so. I don't know.
I'm sure that there is some sort of tax break for doing so, but also equally the immense service charge that they charge their residents. It's thousands and thousands and thousands a year.
So they can run on low occupancy, and then the model works.
But equally, the occupancy doesn't mean ownership. So we have them, fully owned for the older stock, but people have passed on because that's what happens in retirement homes. And the people that are left holding that property, the inheritance of that, they can't sell them. They're unsellable because of the high rates and the fact that there is so much of it. But people will come in and buy the new shiny ones. Yeah. And we've just have a perpetual problem of people getting a lot of service charge money through the companies that do this, but buildings just lying empty.
Yeah. And does this go back to the fact that, construction is not profitable at the moment? I don't think for a lot of people. I mean, we looked at, what we do in Scotland and, we're looking at traditional Georgian townhouse type property that we convert to hotels. But another use would be to turn it into resi, but it's just not profitable. You do the maths on it. It's just, there's nothing in it. With costs that have shot up, I think a lot of construction companies are really struggling to recruit people, move from one company to another because they get paid more. We talk to all our contractors, these are all the problems they're having. I'm not going to mention the B word, but, recruiting people is difficult. Yeah. More difficult than it was a few years ago, let's say. But,
absolutely.
But let's say, unintended consequences. What's some of the other policies that we've got? We've got reform, the renters reform bill. Didn't go through.
Tory and Labour are both hot on that one. There's not a lot to choose between their policies.
There's not. They're both, the only thing with the renters reform, so that would be pretty much the abolition of Section 21, no fault evictions, which I think a lot of professional landlords actually would agree with. We want kind of a stable house. If I look at some of my tenants, I've had some of my tenants in their houses for like 15 years. And I'm delighted with that. So I think there has been some of the policies, I think, targeted at getting the amateurs out of the market is actually not a bad idea. I think the rental market should be operated by professional investors. So I do agree with some of those policies, but I think Labour would be much more geared towards a tenant protection.
Yes.
Which, let's be realistic about this. And this is where, again, I don't fully understand it, is that sometimes you do need to evict tenants. Sometimes tenants stop paying you. Sometimes tenants are, antisocial and they cause problems for neighbours, for other people living in that street and in that area. And, whilst we'd love everyone to be super well behaved and, all live in, cupcake and rainbow land, it's not real. It's just, sometimes you do have to evict people. And for investors that have got a smaller portfolio, one or two tenants that stop paying can be fatal.
Yeah, because it's not just the lost revenue that will pay your mortgage, it's the court costs and time, the time that it takes to evict someone for non-payment or any other sort of Section 8 reason is despite what they might say, we're still living the consequences of the times, and it takes a long time, and it takes a lot of cost.
Yeah, and so for your smaller portfolio landlord, that's unsustainable. So I can see why a lot of smaller portfolio landlords would be looking to exit the market. And now, I think a lot of politicians might think, oh, that's a great thing. Stock back into the market that people can buy, but yeah, for first-time buyers. But that's just not often what that stock is. That stock is rental stock. Because that is a demographic in those areas, and people aren't buyers in those areas often.
Yeah.
So there's so many more nuances to this market. There isn't a housing market. There's thousands and thousands of micro markets. You can't call a housing market one thing. It's not one thing. You could look at any town and there'll be many micro markets within that town. Sometimes even like a street or a handful of streets can be its own little market. And that's what they don't understand. So yeah, there's a lot more going on, I think, than what a lot of politicians really get, and they just look for the headlines.
They do,
think,
yeah.
That's a vote winner. Okay.
Yes, and then we have the other parties, which I don't know, is it even worth talking about? Unfortunately, we are a two-party.
Nige. You're talking about Nige.
Well, we have got Nigel. Goodness gracious, we've got Nigel, who's the only party with the Reform Party that has actually, unsurprisingly, because it's Nigel, he's gone for the disruptive look, and he's actually pro-landlord. He wants to get rid of Section 24, reform planning, and do all of that sort of stuff as well.
So, I mean, there's not really any realistic chance of.
No, he's just in there to mix it up and cause a bit of disruption.
Yeah. So, strangely, I think both the Conservative and Labour policies are really similar. Let's build lots of houses. Okay, renters reform bill, but probably Conservatives slightly more biased towards, or less biased towards a tenant. Labour, I think, be much more pro-tenant. Rent caps, that is on the table with the Labour government.
Well, tell us how that's worked out for you up in Scotland.
Again, just badly thought through policy. Yeah. I mean, that's what it's resulted in. It's resulted in rents going up 30%.
Yeah.
Within about 8 months. Yeah, because they bring it in and think, yeah, everyone will get behind that. Let's stop nasty landlords raising rents. Well, sometimes we have to raise rents because interest rates have gone up. Cost of living has gone up. So if you artificially block rents from the whole inflation equation, what do you think is going to happen? It's such a badly thought through policy. Again, unintended consequences, 30% rent rises. We were literally renting stuff 2 years ago at 550, 600 a month. It's now re-renting at 850 a month. They lift the cap because they have to, because the pressure's built. You put a cap on something and there's huge demand, which there is. What's going to happen? You've got pressure against this cap. You bring a rent cap in, what happens? What do the amateur landlords do? Out. I'm getting out. Yeah. Okay. So
the constriction supply.
Suddenly got a lot less rental stock out there. And the tenant demand is huge. If the fancy of these potential tenants all become buyers, it's just not realistic. Some might, but the vast majority are renters, and they will be long-term renters, and that's okay. And they're happy with that. They like that. They want to be long-term renters. They have no desire to own their own home and can't do it. They won't be able to get mortgages. There is a large percentage of people that are in that position. And that's okay. And that's what we provide. That's why we provide good quality housing for that demographic. But if all the amateurs get out of the market, a lot less rental stock, that pressure massively builds to at some point that cap has to go. And then what's
It
going to happen?
explodes.
It's pretty basic, really.
Yeah. So I think,
But
if we look to, and we're not going to go through each policy in detail, but I think we can summarize to say that Labour and Conservative have quite similar policies on housing that they've announced for the general election. There's not much between them. And it's nothing that we haven't kind of heard before. And we will just roll with it as to whichever one gets in on July the 4th. We will adapt and change, and the market will have its moments where it flips out, and then it will come back to a level where we all just get on with what we've got to do, and we adapt. And that's what it's been like for the last however many years, that we've all been operating in property.
it is, and that's why we have to take a long-term view. And you mentioned it last week. We mentioned this all the time. Property investing is not a get-rich-quick activity. It is build wealth over time, and that you've got to have time in the market. You've got to take a 10-year view, maybe a 20 view. When we started investing, we did take a 20-year view of the, and there's going to be ups and downs within that 10, 20-year period. We can't control what the government does, right? So what we can do, as you've said, is adapt and react to it, and find ways to keep doing what we want to do. I'll keep going back to, if you buy the right type of property, you understand what you're doing, and that does mean going and getting educated. Learn what professional investors do, how they do it, and if you buy the right kind of stock, you can normally outride any of these fluctuations in the market. I know people who, were in the same kind of market as I was, and they were getting frustrated. Oh, prices haven't gone up and rents haven't gone up, and there's probably about almost 10 years in one of my markets where that never happened. But my view was at some point it will, because fundamentals of the property market are that, prices will at some point start rising, wages will start rising, people will be able to afford, more money on rents. And, the government up here did play into our hands a little bit with the rent caps. And I thought, well, look, we have to ride it out. You ride out that 1-2 year period, where you can't raise your rents, but it was unsustainable, and you knew what was going to happen as soon as it was lifted.
Yeah.
It's basic economics, really. So,
the hilarious thing is that we've watched it happen in other areas globally. Ireland has had the same, and we all sat there and watched that. And then our government went and did the same. You're just like, what are you doing?
Yeah, it's like, go and actually have a look at countries where it works, and try and maybe model that. But at the end of the day, my view is you've got to take a free market approach. You can't. So many governments have tried to control housing. You can't. You have to let it just be as it is.
Yeah.
Because the market will determine what happens. You can't officially change it, I don't think.
No. And when we say you can't control housing, we don't mean that you can't control the standards in the rental sector or the standards in house building. That is a very different issue. What we're talking about is the supply and demand aspects of things. If you start manipulating the supply by unintended consequences, it will affect demand, and that is just simple economics. So if you're thinking that we're controlling letting slum landlords in, that is absolutely not what we're saying. Standards and health is paramount, and that is something we will always be a champion of.
Absolutely, I'm all for anything that makes tenants safer. Absolutely, great things that have been brought in. Our rules around, widened smoke alarms and, electricity being up to standard. All these standards have been brought in are really good things.
Yeah. It's a pity that the social housing market that is not the private part doesn't have to adhere to the same standards as the private rental sector.
Incredible, isn't it? It's absolutely incredible. But there you go. As I said, it's not something we can as individuals control. But what we can do is make sure that we're doing things properly. We're buying firstly the right kind of property, and make sure you know your numbers, and that you can. And if you get your numbers right at the very beginning, you can ride out all of these short-term fluctuations. You can ride out spikes in interest rates, you can ride out things like rent caps and trust that in the long term, these kind of policies plucked out of the air will go, because supply and demand will take care of that. And in the long term, it is still a viable way to build wealth. I've always thought that. That's what we teach. It's not get in, get out. We haven't really touched on developers, and that's, I think, a whole different thing. But in terms of the buying and renting and building of a rental business and getting in, building that up through buy-to-lets, HMOs, etc., you've got to take that long-term view.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, that is enough politics for me for any time period. We will wait with bated breath as to what the country decides on the 4th of July, and then the 100 days after that to see what the big things that come in will be. And as before, we will roll with it, adapt, lick our wounds, and get on, and just control what we can control.
Absolutely. Yes. Right. Excellent. Well, look, I think it was good to get that one done, just to give you our opinion on what, our take as private landlords and investors. So yes, next time, let's get on to something more fun to talk about, I think, Sarah.
Not sure what that's going to be yet, but let's definitely have a bit more smiling.
All right.
So if anyone wants to get in touch with us, Nick, what's the best way to go about that?
Best way to go about that is you can find me on LinkedIn, just Nick Clayden, property. You can follow me on Instagram, although I probably don't do a lot on Instagram, but you can follow Caroline on Instagram. And Sarah, you're on LinkedIn?
Yep, LinkedIn, and we will have our website up and running. I think I keep saying this. We're going to have episodes where I just keep saying the website will be up and running soon, and it will. So there you go. Yeah. thispropertylife.co.uk.
Thispropertylife.co.uk. And you can also get us in the meantime at propertywealthsystem.co.uk.
Thanks, Nick.
We'll see you next time.